I received pretty positive feedback for my walkthrough on Oak Hill, so I decided to take on another difficult course, and that's Grizzly Gulch. So I'm going to go ahead and play through, similar to what I did before in the previous video for Oak Hill. I'm going to play through 3 rounds on Grizzly Gulch. And I am using some different discs. I am using a Fuse as my putter, similar to what I've been doing the last week or so. And I'm also using the Recoil instead of the Musket. So that's taken a little getting used to, which you'll see in this video. So we've got a Fuse, a River, Explorer, the Recoil, and then a couple ballistas. And so hole 1 I'm using a Fuse. And the Fuse is so straight, you got to be careful where you aim it. I mean, the only thing to avoid is that one tree right there. Your best bet is probably to aim a little to the left of that tree and just give yourself a putt. Like that one from 48, that's a little further out than I would have hoped for a hole that's that easy. So hole 2, I used to use a sidearm musket, but the musket ended up being a little too overstable and I'd end up in the rocks. So I'm throwing a sidearm river. And the river being a 7-speed and the windbreak is a little bit shorter, but I figure as long as I avoid those 2 rocks that are out in front, that's pretty standard stuff. I also like to use an Explorer, but again, the Explorer is a little overstable and has a tendency to drift towards those rocks. This hole I know is the bane of everyone's existence, the uphill par 4 here. And it's honestly, if you just practice it, it's a light glide ballista shot. Just get it somewhere up here on the side of the hill, aim for it. And from 71 feet, I want to make this most of the time, and there I left it short. One thing I have found as I switch to the Fuse over the Pure is the trajectory is a little lower, and so sometimes it's a little harder to get over the hill, so I've been leaving a couple of those short. But I'll correct that in the next week or two. So this par 3, if you want to know why I'm using the river right now, see, I got very lucky on that shot. This hole right here is the reason I'm using the river, because the Explorer used to be a perfect disc for this hole, but when the Explorer became a little more overstable, I was having more issues landing it correctly on that flat spot. And here we got par 4 with a little bit of wind, so I'm going to try to make it up on the ledge. But I found the Explorer was a little too overstable, so I switched to the river just to experiment, and just right out of the gate it worked perfectly for me. And so that's the reason I've got the river in the bag, was because of that par 3. So this par 4, I made it up top. If you've got a tailwind of 2 or 3, as long as you put the light glide ballista on the right angle, you got a good shot of getting up there. And so I was really happy to get an eagle out of that one. And this one used to be a tricky hole, and so I'm going to aim just to the left of that tree and do a turnover shot. With the wind not affecting the shots as much, this, I don't want to say it's definitely not a gimme eagle because you've got those trees there, but I want to give that a shot at eagle almost every time. And so that one snuck through, had a pretty easy eagle there, but this hole is considerably easier now that the wind doesn't have as much effect. This hole is exactly the opposite. I'm still figuring this one out. So I used to throw a musket on this, and now I'm throwing my Recoil. And you can see right there the Recoil was way, way, way too overstable. And so it hit up on the hill, which is not normally a bad thing, but this just came rolling all the way back down. And so that is definitely a work in progress for me, figuring out where to aim, how high, how low. The Recoil, I think, is the right disc, the wind glide Recoil, but I'm still figuring out where exactly to throw it. So kind of got lucky with the par there, but you'll see in the later rounds that's still kind of the same shot I like to use. This hole is also a lot easier as well. In the 901 update, the ballista, I like to throw sidearm because you want to play into those rocks. The ballista would have a tendency to flip over and would leave you a little wide, and so sometimes I would actually end up in the water, which if you've ever been down in the water there, you sometimes get stuck and end up taking a 10 or a 12. And so I like that the ballista has a nice finish at the end, so you can throw a sidearm and let it finish over to those rocks. Cave to cave hole. This is another one where I'm going to use the Recoil, and I'm still tweaking my aim point. But this and the previous par 3, the big downhill one, are probably the hardest par 3s in the game. And that skips up very nicely. Other than maybe the big downhill par 3 on Crow's Nest, I think those 3, without question, are probably the hardest par 3s. And so that one, I put a nice little turnover on it, got a pretty easy, although that putt almost leaked out, pretty easy birdie on that one, but that is by no means an easy hole. So I ended up with a 10 under, 21, pretty solid. That would have gotten me 3 stars. And so now I'm going to run it back. Same discs. And so first hole here, I'm going to make the adjustment. I'm going to aim a little far left. And this is a great lesson pretty much for a game and regular disc golf, is you don't have to aim directly at the hole. That's not necessary. All you want to do is give yourself a reasonable putt. I think too many people want to go right at the pin. Just play it out to the left, give yourself a 30, 35 footer, and get your birdie. Like, it doesn't have to be a tap in every single time. Because if you want to do that, you're going to bring into play those trees. It's just aim to the side, get it past the trees, give yourself a putt, and walk out with the birdie. And so there's my river again. So with the tailwind, that was just ideal. And again, I love the river on that hole over the Explorer or even the Musket when I have it. It just has that nice straight flight, easy birdie as long as there's no strong headwind, which doesn't have a big effect, but it can still affect your shot a little bit. And so here we go again, same hole, almost identical shot before. And so now I'm going to make the adjustment. Last time my shot was a little low, so I'm going to add a little bit more power to it, and hopefully it goes in, and it did. So making mistakes is okay, but you have to learn from them and make adjustments. So right there, I added a little more power, so I did not leave it short. Now this one here, I'm going to use the river again, but it's got a left to right wind of 2, so you got to be really, really, really careful where you aim. And that one, I mean, I'm aiming down there that very easily could kick out of bounds. And so I end up with my second tap in a row. But this hole gets dangerous if you've got that left to right crosswind. It's not enough to really, really blow it in the water, but it's enough to affect your shot just a little bit. Okay, so with the wind of 1, I'm probably not going to make it on the shelf. So what I wanted to play here was a big stall shot and leave myself about 80, 90. And this one just kept going and going and going and going. And so that's a shot that I've got to work on. I don't want to leave myself. See, right here, I've got pretty much no shot. So I'm going to throw my putter up there, and 60 feet uphill. I don't want to say there's no way to make that, because there probably is, but you're not going to make that shot. So I'm just throwing it up there and getting my birdie. But ideally, I want to leave myself, without the tailwind, I want to leave myself about 80 to 100 feet short so that I've got myself a shot at a throw-in. Okay, so this one I would normally play that turnover shot I did first round, but I wanted to show you guys a different line that if you get the right winds, you can actually play it wide right here. And so this wind was not ideal, so I probably shouldn't have thrown this shot, but I wanted to kind of illustrate what the shot would look like. And so you aim way wide right and kind of play a hyzer on it, and that one I went out of bounds. And so I went ahead and re-teed, and I'm going to throw the shot again. And again, with this wind, I would never throw this shot, but I wanted to at least show you guys that there are some different lines on it, so that was even worse. This is the kind of line you would use if there's a right to left, so the wind kind of helping me towards the basket. So I play a little more hyzer, and finally on the third shot, you get it, and you bring the trees into play a little bit more with that line, but again, it's just a different option you guys can have if you want to try to go that route. And so I ended up with a bogey, even though I drove 3 times, and I had an OB stroke. So to only get a bogey, that kind of tells you it's still pretty solid. Okay, so last time on hole 7 here, I ended up cutting it too hard left. And so I tried it again and still kind of bringing those trees into play. But ideally, that is not a bad thing to do, to kind of have it circle back around. But if you hit too high on the hill, it'll roll directly into the water. So that play right there was actually not lucky. That's kind of how I play this hole, is slam it into the left, let it roll back. But again, if you hit too high on the hill, it's just going to hit and roll into the water. And then hole 8, so same thing I talked about. I'm going to throw a sidearm, put a little hyzer. So right there, see how it kind of faded out to the left? In the older versions, that ballista would have been long gone to the left. It would have been into the water and not good. And so I kind of brought these trees into play, but it's only 146 feet. And so I'm actually going to shift to a forehand, because the forehand's roughly 80% of the power of a backhand. So I'll use that if I want to get the power just a little less, but obviously I don't have a putter, so I can't power down too much. I'd rather just use the sidearm and pop it there. And then the cave to cave. So this one, again, I play a little bit of turnover, but I did not play nearly enough turnover. So I probably needed to shift my aim a little far out to the right. Again, I have not used the recoil on that hole a lot because I was used to using the Musket, but the Musket just doesn't get there anymore, not consistently for me. And so obviously that was not a good shot, rolled down the hill. So from down here, you're just trying to get get up and down, make sure you get your par. And so I get an upshot, throw my Explorer, and I almost made it, but did not. So end up with a par, which is not uncommon nowadays with that hole. So turns into a pretty tricky hole. But overall, solid round. Even with a couple of rethrows, I still shot a 24. So then going into our third round, I'll try to use some of the same lines from my first one. And so just, again, the whole purpose of this is just to show some different lines. So here with a crosswind of 3, again, even though the wind doesn't affect it a lot, it still affects it. So this one I actually wanted to play a little further left. But one thing I found, so that worked out fine, is the wind affects the shot like right out of your hand. So if it's a left or right wind of 3, immediately out of your hand it'll kick to the right, and then it'll still kind of glide to the right, but it has that first initial hit where it's either left or right or long or short. So here, tailwind of 1, again, just going to throw that sidearm river. And the only time I might have issues with that is if there's a headwind of 2 or 3. I need to experiment a little with the recoil, even though I think the recoil might be a little too far on that hole. But that's something I'll go into the challenge the valley and mess around with that a little bit. Okay, so same shot as the first two. Going to play the ballista. Now the ballista's a driver, so it's not as consistent. So as you see right here, it just did not work. So that was almost the same shot I did on the first 2 rounds, but it rolled and rolled and rolled and rolled. And it's actually going to end up under the ledge there. So now I've got kind of a challenging shot here. 181, so this is why I keep the Explorer in the bag. It's a little overstable. But I'm just going to power up, and we're going to crank it up over the top, almost turning it into a roller. And my goal is just to get it somewhere up top and give myself a putt. So that was less than ideal, so 67. So this is a little further ahead than where my drive should have been. So, and I've practiced those 67-foot shots, so that was not the most ideal birdie there, but it worked out fine. And so this is extremely tricky with a 3 crosswind. So I'm throwing the river, and I immediately flip it, and I thought it was water. Hit, I thought for sure it was in the water, and somehow, some way, a little sliver stayed on the land. I mean, that's the hardest drop zone shot in the game. You're pretty much guaranteed a 4, unless you want to try to run it and possibly go into the drink on your third shot. So here it's a crosswind of 3 with a little bit of tail. So I'm actually trying to get it up there, and that is the worst spot to be. You're in no position to make the shot. And here, so this is another example. I could go right at the hole, but that's not going to serve any purpose because I'm not going to make it. So I'm actually aiming at the lowest spot on the rock wall there, which is to the left, throw it up top, and I'm 36 feet away. Again, some people will go directly at the hole, but that's the harder shot. You're not going to make it. So just use the percentages, play it up to the spot where you can get it up top as easy as possible, and go from there. So here I'm not going to screw around with that right shot because there's no way with a 3 wind that playing wide right is going to ever make it back. So I'm going to go back to my other shot, play it out, play the flex shot out to the right, let the wind kind of push it back, hits the hill, rolls down, pretty easy eagle, almost rolled into a tap-in. So again, you can use that wide right route. You got to be careful when you're using it. Make sure the wind isn't moving left to right. So this one I've hopefully adjusted. So I'm going to aim a little bit lower, throw my recoil. And it seems like every time I throw, I bring those trees into play. But I'm actually okay with kind of slamming it into the wall there like that. This is what we talked about last round. And just let it roll, roll, roll. That, I'm okay with that. So again, as long as you don't hit too high up on the wall on the left, it's not going to roll down in the water. And then 42 feet, even with the water behind it, if you're putting straight, you should make that every time. And then this one, again, I don't want to say there's not really much to this hole, but really the only bad thing can happen, you got to watch when you clip these trees, like I almost hit one there. You could get behind these bushes, or you can hit a tree and go left. And so here, 210 feet, I always disc up. That seems like it would be fuse range. Now I've got that bush in the way, so you'll notice I kind of aimed a little left and threw the hyzer shot, or a little flex hyzer, or turnover, I should say. and just got it up there. And maybe the bush wouldn't have affected that at all, but I was not even messing around with it. So aim a little left, force the ante over, let it flex back, and get the shot. And then this one, again, this is another one I'm going to practice a lot with that recoil just to get used to it. And this one I left way to the right. So I overcompensated. Last time I left it to the left, this time it was to the right. And so now I'm way over here, which these are the types of shots. You don't want them all to be perfect. You want to be able to practice these. And so right now my goal is to just kind of throw one up here. And this is not an easy shot. I'm hoping to kind of hyzer it around the rocks, slam it into the far wall, and hopefully stay up top and get my par. And I did that, but it didn't quite stay up top and rolled all the way back down. So I'm hoping to at least get a shot here. So I think I'm behind the wall there, and I'm going to try to make this with my fuse. But just, I think that rock wall's slightly in the way. And so midair, I thought I had a shot at it, and it just kind of chained out. So even I get bogeys on this sometimes. You got to be patient with it and practice it, and ended up with a 4 on that. Again, still shot a 23. So I think I shot a 22, a 24, and a 23. So hopefully that gives you a little insight on some of the holes on Grizzly and how to tackle them and some of the problems that can arise and little strategies to help you get out of messes. So I will be back with the next video on Lakeside.